That door was locked from the inside, and everybody in that hallway knew it didn't matter. 7 shadows stood shoulder to shoulder, quiet as death. Not outside a cabin, not down by the quarters, up here, in the part of the house that smelled like perfume and polished wood, where rules lived, where voices stayed low because the walls belonged to the master. Somewhere below, a clock kept talking. Tick, 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 not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like it had been paid to count down to something ugly. Behind that door, the girl was still breathing like she owned the air. In the hallway, those men breathed like they'd been denied air their whole lives. You want to understand power? Don't look for a gun. Don't look for a whip. Look at who gets to lock a door and feel safe. And look at what happens when that safety finally runs out. Because that night wasn't a riot. It wasn't a rebellion with banners. It was a message delivered in the only language the house ever used. The kind of lesson that doesn't need shouting. The kind that crawls into your bones and never leaves. The thing is, folks love a clean story. One side good, one side evil. One victim, one monster. But this wasn't clean. This was what you get when a place runs on stealing. Not just stealing land or money. Stealing bodies. Stealing names. Stealing tomorrow. And after years of it, the theft becomes normal. Until one night, the people you trained to be powerless decide to try on power for themselves. That's the part that makes everybody uncomfortable. Because the men in that hallway weren't born monsters. They were manufactured, and the man who owned the house, he didn't raise them with kindness. He raised them like you raise dogs for fighting, with hunger, with fear, with punishment so consistent it becomes routine. He didn't just hurt people, he taught hurting. And the students, they learned fast, tick. The clock didn't rush. Neither did they. That's what you need to know about men who have waited their whole lives. They don't move like teenagers. They don't move like drunks. They move like chess players. Slow hands, still faces, eyes that already saw the ending. One of them, the one closest to the door, kept his head tilted like he was listening for a lie. Inside, the girl shifted. Maybe she thought it was the wind. Maybe she thought the house was settling. That's what the privileged always think. They think danger is something that happens to other people. But danger had been living under this roof for years. It just had a different address, a different victim, and a different set of rules. Now those rules were breaking, not with a shout, with a decision. But before we step through that door, you need to know the first crack in the foundation. Because nothing like that night shows up out of nowhere. It gets built, piece by piece. Cruelty by cruelty. Like a man stacking bricks, confident nobody will ever kick the wall. Years earlier, the master brought a woman to this plantation in a wagon like she was furniture. Not from a nearby farm, not from a family trade, from a trap. She had papers once. Real ones, the kind that said she belonged to herself. She'd been walking free up north, thinking the world was hard, but at least it was hers. Then she took a wrong road into the wrong state, and a man offered her kindness with poison behind it. You ever notice how the sweetest offers come from people with the dirtiest intentions? One drink, one smile, one "I know a safe place." Next thing she knew, she woke up in a room where the windows didn't open and the men didn't call her by her name. They called her girl. They called her stock. They called her good money. And the first thing they did wasn't chain her. The first thing they did was burn what proved she was human. Paper turns to ash easy. So does freedom if nobody around you respects it. By the time she got to the auction, she'd already learned the new math of the South. A black woman alone equals a target. A target equals profit. Profit equals permission. The master saw her there and made his choice with his eyes, not his conscience. He wasn't shopping for help. He was shopping for ownership that could breathe. He bought her like a man buying a horse, checked her arms, her teeth. Let the auction man praise her strength like that made it okay. Somebody whispered that she could read, and the crowd got nervous. Reading makes a person dangerous, you know why? Because reading lets you imagine an exit. The master didn't care. Or maybe he cared the way a gambler cares about risk. Risk makes the game exciting. He took her home and skipped the quarters like they didn't exist. Drove her straight past the cabins, past the kitchens, past the places where enslaved women learned how to survive without making noise, straight into his private space. No ceremony, No warning, no mercy. The house didn't have a mistress anymore. The old one had died bringing a daughter into the world. So the master filled that vacancy the way men like him fill every vacancy, with force. For months, that woman lived where the master wanted her, when he wanted her, how he wanted her. And here's the part people don't like to say out loud, so they wrap it in polite language. But there is nothing polite about it. He treated her like a thing, not because he forgot she was human, because he needed to believe she was. Men like that can't stomach the truth. The truth makes you accountable. So they build a lie and live inside it. And then, because cruelty always wants interest, she got pregnant. At first, the master smiled about it, not because he loved her, because a child meant more property, a new body to count, a new price to calculate, a new life to own before it ever learned to talk. That was his kind of family planning. But the woman he bought, she still had one stubborn thing left in her, a mind. And a mind, even bruised, still reaches for daylight. One night she ran. No plan big enough, no map safe enough, just legs and desperation. She made miles, not freedom, just miles. Then the dogs found her, and that's when the plantation remembered what it was. They dragged her back at dawn like a warning sign, torn clothes, bleeding feet. Eyes that had seen hope for a few hours and now had to bury it again. The master didn't rage. He didn't foam at the mouth. He didn't need to. He walked out calm like he was about to inspect crops. That calm is what makes men like him terrifying, because anger is messy. Calm is deliberate. He had her punished in front of everybody. The whole plantation gathered because he wanted witnesses. He wanted the lesson to spread. And while she carried his child, while her body was already fighting to keep another life alive, he made sure every back on that land understood one thing. You don't belong to yourself here. Not your arms, not your breath, not your baby. Everything you are is on somebody else's ledger. She survived the punishment. The baby survived too. And when that boy was born, the master didn't pick a name like a father. He picked a label, a word that said what he believed more than any sermon ever could. He wrote it down, ink on paper, like the ink could make it true. Then when the child was barely old enough to hold his own head up, the master sold him, just like that. No goodbye, no hesitation, a baby as a transaction. The mother screamed for days, then she stopped. Not just stopped screaming, stopped speaking. Silence like a locked room. She moved through the house after that like a spirit that hadn't figured out where to go. She cooked. She cleaned. She did what she was told because the body can keep working even when the soul clocks out. Years later, she ended up in the river. Nobody could say if it was an accident or a choice. But here's what I'll tell you. When a person has had every exit barred, sometimes the only door left is the one that scares everybody else. They buried her without a marker. That's how the system finishes the job. First it takes your freedom, then it takes your voice, then it takes your name. And still, the story doesn't end there, because a stolen name has a funny way of coming back as a curse. By the time we reach that locked bedroom door, that woman's pain has been living in the soil for years. Feeding something bitter, feeding something patient, feeding 7 men who each carried their own private hell. Let me tell you about them the way I'd tell you about men on a corner I'm responsible for, not as saints, not as devils, as men with pressure behind their eyes. The first one was the thinker, the one people went to when they needed sense in a senseless place. He learned letters the way hungry men learn roots, quietly watching, stealing knowledge wherever it was left unguarded. He could quote scripture, yeah, but what mattered wasn't the Bible. What mattered was he understood rules. And when you understand rules, you can predict people. He had a wife, gentle hands, careful voice. The kind of woman who survived by folding herself small. Then the master decided he wanted her. Not asked, decided. And that's when the thinker started changing. Because there's a moment when faith turns into ash, when patience stops sounding holy and starts sounding like a trick. Another man was built like a wall, quiet, scarred. Throat marked from an old day when he tried to stop an overseer from carving pain into somebody he loved. He never got his old voice back after that. It came out rough, like gravel. Some people mistake silence for peace. That's because they've never met a man who stores rage like a savings account. Then there was the older one, the traveler, The one who'd been sold from place to place because he didn't bow right, didn't smile right, didn't pretend he was less than he was. He'd run before. Twice. He knew what dogs sounded like in the dark. He knew what chains felt like after you tasted a bed that belonged to you. The second time he ran, it cost him everything he still loved. That system doesn't just punish you, it invoices you. Another was young, but his youth didn't mean innocence. He grew up closer to the house than most, learned how to move quiet, how to serve tea with his eyes down. The kind of training that teaches you you're alive only as long as you're useful. Then he found his mother bleeding on a kitchen floor, and something in him went cold and patient. He didn't cry at her burial. He didn't need to. He made a promise inside himself and let it sit there like a knife. There was the blacksmith, hands scarred from making metal obey. Think about that. A man forced to craft chains with the same hands he'd one day want to use to break them. He had a wife too, and a little boy. Then the master did what masters do when they get bored and greedy. He called the wife into a private room. The boy heard. The boy ran in. And the master handled that child the way you handle an inconvenience. Calm, efficient. When the blacksmith found out he didn't need a speech, he needed a plan. Two more men rounded it out. One strong enough that pain stopped mattering the normal way. A man whose mind ran in circles from too many beatings, too many years of being treated like an animal. But when you needed muscle, when you needed someone who could lift a burden without asking questions, that man was there. And the last was a builder. Carpenter hands, the kind that put up fences, cabins, additions to the big house. He understood something most people miss. If you can build a thing, you can take it apart. He had daughters. And he could already see the day those daughters would get looked at the way the master looked at every woman he wanted. A man doesn't need prophecy when he's seen the pattern long enough. So when the thinker sent word, those men didn't show up laughing. They didn't show up drunk. They came like men attending their own funeral. They met in the barn late, when the overseer's lantern had disappeared and the dogs were too tired to bark at shadows. The barn smelled like dried leaf and old punishment. The kind of place where screams got swallowed. At first, nobody spoke, because saying it out loud makes it real. Then the blacksmith said what everybody already knew. The boy was gone. The wife was alive but not living. And the master was still walking free around the house like nothing had happened. That's when the young one asked the first question men ask when their backs are against the wall. So what do we do? Run where? Up north. You ever seen what happens when a man gets caught chasing freedom? They don't just bring you back, they make a show out of you. They turn you into a lesson for everybody else. The older one said it plain, running wasn't a plan, it was a delayed death. So the room went quiet again and you could almost hear the clock from the house counting down from miles away. Then the thinker leaned in, eyes steady. Not running, he said, a pause, ending it. Nobody gasped, nobody clutched pearls. Because every man in that circle had already killed the master in his head 100 times. But there's a difference between a thought and a step. The builder asked what he meant, and the thinker didn't say it like a man trying to persuade. He said it like a man stating whether. The master leaves soon, he told them. The overseer drinks himself blind by nightfall. The house gets soft when the master's gone. The older one narrowed his eyes. So we go in there and kill him. The thinker shook his head once. No. That no landed heavy, because it meant something else, something colder, something that didn't end with one dead man and a quick rope for 7 others. It meant a move that would reach deeper than blood. The young one swallowed like he already sensed where this was headed. So what then? The thinker looked around the circle, and in that dim barn light you could see it on their faces. The moment they realized he wasn't talking about the master's body, he was talking about the master's heart. And when he finally said it, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He just placed the idea on the dirt between them like a loaded weapon. The daughter, he said, not to ransom her, not to bargain, to strike the master where masters believe they're untouchable. To make the house feel for one night what the quarters felt every night. The builder's jaw tightened because he had daughters and he understood lines you don't cross. But the thinker's eyes didn't blink. Different, the builder tried to say. And the thinker cut that word down before it could grow. Different how? Nobody answered, because the truth was sitting right there, ugly and undeniable. The difference wasn't morality. The difference was power. And power was the whole disease. The older one spoke next, slow and careful. If we do this, we become what we hate. The thinker's face stayed calm. I'm not trying to be pure, he said. I'm trying to be heard. The barn fell silent again, not because they agreed, because deep down every one of them knew the system had already made them choose between dying quiet and living dangerous. And outside, somewhere beyond the fields, the big house clock kept talking to itself. Tick, tick, tick. Like it was counting down to the moment that locked bedroom door would stop meaning safety and start meaning a trap. And in that barn, 7 men sat with a decision so heavy it could crush a soul. Because once you make a move like that, there's no walking it back. And the thinker, he leaned forward like a man who could already see the fallout, already see the bodies, already see the rope. Then he asked the question that turned the air cold. Are you with me, he said, or are you gonna leave me standing alone when the night comes? No one answered right away, but the way their eyes shifted, the way their hands tightened, told you everything. Somebody in that circle was ready, somebody was afraid, and somebody might not be as loyal as they looked. Because plans like this don't only bring heat from the outside, they bring betrayal from within. And the night was getting closer. Silence doesn't mean agreement, it means everybody's counting the cost. That barn stayed quiet long enough for doubt to get comfortable, long enough for each man to imagine his own ending. A rope cutting air, dogs barking, boots in the dirt before sunrise. You don't grow up enslaved without learning how the story usually ends. The first one to move wasn't the loudest. It was the scarred one, the man with the ruined voice. He didn't raise his hand, he didn't make a speech, he just nodded, once. That nod said everything. It said he'd already buried his sister, already buried mercy, already buried prayer. Whatever came next couldn't scare him more than memory did. The blacksmith followed, eyes hollow, jaw set, his hands that shaped iron curled slowly into fists like they'd been waiting for permission. I'm in, he said, flat, no emotion left to dress it up. The young one nodded too, quicker than the rest. Hunger has a way of speeding decisions. He'd been waiting on a reason since the kitchen floor turned red. The big one, the one built like punishment, didn't even speak. He just leaned back against a post and crossed his arms. Agreement the way a storm agrees with gravity. That left too. The builder stared at the dirt like it might give him an answer. He was thinking about the future, about little feet growing into dangerous ages, about whether this choice saved his daughters or signed their death warrants. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. I don't believe this fixes anything, he said. Then quieter, but doing nothing fixes less. He nodded. Now all eyes turned to the last man, the oldest, the one who'd tasted freedom and had it ripped back out of his mouth, the one who knew what hope cost when it got noticed. He took his time, real time, looked at each face like he was memorizing it for a prayer he didn't believe in anymore. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it clean, we don't kill her, we don't turn into animals. The thinker met his gaze. We don't need death, he said, we need understanding. That word sat heavy. Understanding can ruin a person quicker than violence ever could. The old man nodded once. Then I'm in. That was it, 7 men. One plan, no speeches after that, no cheers, no shaking hands. Men don't celebrate when they know they're stepping into something that won't let them walk back out. They talk details next. Quiet, efficient, like men planning a job, not a crime, who'd take the stairs, who'd handle the door, who'd keep watch, who'd keep their heads when things went sideways because things always go sideways. The thinker already knew the rhythms of the house, who drank, who slept heavy, which boards complained under weight. Knowledge is power when you're denied everything else. The master's absence wasn't luck, it was opportunity. By the time the barn emptied, the night had shifted. Wind moved different, like it knew something was coming and wanted distance from it. The house stayed quiet in the days that followed. That's the part nobody tells you about plans like this. The waiting, still working. still answering to whistles and orders like nothing's changed, while your mind is already past the point of no return. The girl stayed inside mostly, played piano, smiled when spoken to, moved like a person who thought danger had an address somewhere else. She didn't see the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, didn't hear the silence sharpen behind her footsteps. She didn't know she'd been chosen because she mattered, because love, twisted enough, becomes leverage. The night came calm, too calm. Stars laid out like witnesses who wouldn't interfere. The thinker waited until the overseer drank himself unconscious, watched the lantern sway, then disappear, listened until the house settled into its false sense of security. Then he moved. They didn't rush. Rushing gets sloppy. Sloppy gets you caught, bare feet on wood, slow breaths, hands ready. The builder eased the door. He'd built this wing himself years back. He knew where it groaned and where it kept secrets. The girl never heard them. That's the cruel joke. Safety makes you deaf. When the door closed behind them, the room stopped being hers. Hands moved fast, trained by years of reacting instead of choosing. One over the mouth, one on the arms, weight applied without panic. She fought. Of course she did. Anyone would. But numbers change everything. The thinker leaned close enough for her to hear calm where she expected rage. "No screaming," he said. "This doesn't have to be worse than it already is." She cried anyway. Tears don't listen to reason. They bound her quick, efficient, not rough, not gentle, purposeful. When the light came up, her eyes locked onto faces she recognized but had never really seen. Men she'd passed every day like furniture that moved. Recognition hit her before fear finished loading. They carried her out like a secret, through halls she'd never been afraid of, past doors that had always opened for her. Outside, the air was sharp, honest. No perfume to hide behind. The barn waited. That door had seen things, heard things. Held pain long before this night decided to borrow it again. Inside, the lantern swung. Shadows stretched. Faces broke apart and reassembled in the moving light. The thinker stood in front of her. "You know why you're here?" he asked. She shook her head, gag muffling whatever answer she tried to give. "Your father," he said, "has been teaching us lessons for a long time." He paused, let the weight settle. "Tonight," he continued, "you're going to learn one too." The builder shifted behind him. The old man swallowed hard. Even monsters hesitate before they're born. She sobbed, begged, shook her head like denial could rewind time. The thinker didn't raise his voice. "You lived in that house," he said. "You heard things, you saw things, you chose not to ask." He crouched so they were eye level. "Tonight, there's no choosing not to see." The others stepped closer, not rushed, not eager, committed. And in that moment, right before the line disappeared for good, something flickered across one man's face. Hesitation. Just a crack, just long enough to wonder. Was everybody really ready to finish this? Or was somebody about to fold when it mattered most? Because once the first step crossed the line, there'd be no turning back. And if even one man broke, that barn would become a tomb. For everyone, hesitation gets people killed. The thinker saw it the moment it surfaced. A flicker. A breath held too long, fear trying to negotiate its way back into the room. He straightened slowly. "This only works," he said, calm as ever, "if nobody forgets why we're here." Nobody answered. The lantern swayed, throwing the girl's shadow across the dirt floor. Tied, small, no longer untouchable. For the first time in her life, power wasn't on her side of the room. She tried to speak through the cloth again. Tried to tell them she wasn't him. Tried to separate herself from the man who owned her name. The thinker listened, really listened. Then he shook his head once. "That difference," he said, "is the lie this place runs on." He motioned and the cloth was pulled free from her mouth. "I didn't know," she gasped. "I swear, I didn't know everything." "That's the thing," the thinker replied. "You knew enough." The words didn't come with anger, they didn't need it. They landed heavy because they were true. The blacksmith stepped forward next. His voice came out rough, cracked from holding it in for years. "Do you know what he did to my boy?" he asked. She shook her head again, eyes wide. "He stood there," the blacksmith said, pointing at a place only he could see. Calm, hands steady. And he squeezed the life out of an 8-year-old, because the child loved his mother. Her breathing broke. She made a sound that wasn't language. "Sorry," she whispered. The old man laughed once, no humor in it. "Sorry's a word people use when they still get to leave," he said. The builder looked away. This was the part he'd been afraid of, the part where revenge stopped feeling righteous and started feeling permanent. The thinker raised his hand, stopping them before the moment tipped too far. "This isn't about pleasure," he said, "and it's not about killing." He looked directly at her. "It's about understanding what it means to have no control over your own body." The words sank in slowly, too slowly. She started to shake. "No," she said, "please, I'm not your enemy." The thinker didn't argue. Neither were our wives. What happened next wasn't shouted. It wasn't chaotic. It unfolded with the terrible calm of something inevitable. No frenzy. No celebration. Just men doing what they believed was the only way left to be heard in a world that had refused to listen. The builder stood frozen for part of it, heart pounding, watching the line vanish in front of him. Watching the men he'd known his whole life step into something that would never let them sleep the same again. At one point, the girl stopped fighting. That's the moment that haunts people, not the screams, the quiet. The lantern burned low. Time stretched and warped like the night itself didn't want to witness what it was holding. When it was over, nobody spoke right away. No apologies. No triumph. The thinker knelt in front of her one last time. "Now," he said softly, "you know." They untied her, stepped back, gave her space like distance could undo what had just been written into her memory. Then they left, no running, no looking back. Just 7 men walking out into the dark, carrying something heavier than chains. She stayed on that dirt floor until dawn. When the light crept in through the cracks, it found her still breathing, still alive, but changed in a way no one ever prepares you for. By the time she made it back to the house, the world looked the same. That's the cruelest part. The floors were still polished, the clock still talked. Breakfast was still served like nothing had happened, and in the quarters the men waited, not celebrating, waiting, for dogs. For guns, for ropes, for the price. But the morning came, then another, and nothing happened. No shouts, no search parties, no punishment, just silence. And silence when you're guilty is louder than screams, because silence means thinking, silence means planning. Silence means the other side is deciding what hurts most. And somewhere in the big house, the girl sat alone, staring at walls that had finally started whispering back. The question wasn't if the hammer would fall. The question was when. And who it would crush first. Because in a house built on control, the most dangerous thing in the world is a secret that won't stay buried. And somebody was already reaching for the ledger, waiting to turn the page. Silence stretched itself thin. In the quarters, men still rose before dawn. Still bent their backs, still answered to whistles and names that weren't theirs. From the outside, the plantation breathed like it always had. But inside the bodies moving through it, something had shifted. The thinker noticed it first. Not in words, in posture. Men flinched less. Eyes stayed level a second longer. The kind of changes overseers feel before they can explain them. Power doesn't disappear quietly. It listens. It watches. And when it feels challenged, it starts counting. Up in the house, the girl didn't scream. That surprised her more than anything. She didn't collapse into hysterics, didn't run to the overseer, didn't summon men with guns and dogs the way she'd been raised to believe was her right. Instead, she sat, for hours, then days. Food went untouched. Piano stayed closed. Mirrors became things she avoided, because reflection is dangerous when you finally understand what you've been standing on. When the master returned, he felt it immediately. Men like him always do. Something in the air was wrong, not broken, shifted. Like furniture moved an inch to the left in a room you know by heart. His daughter looked hollow, present but far away. He asked questions the way powerful men ask, assuming answers would obey. She gave him none. That bothered him more than tears ever could, because tears can be managed. Silence can't. He watched her the way generals watch borders, waiting for movement, waiting for weakness. And then he noticed the study. The ledgers weren't where he'd left them. That's when the unease curled tight. Those books weren't just records, they were proof. Confessions dressed up as accounting, dates, names, prices, lives reduced to neat rows of ink, Men like him don't fear violence, they fear exposure. He didn't accuse her right away. That would have been sloppy. Instead, he waited, let the house tighten, let paranoia do its work. Meanwhile, the thinker understood something had gone wrong the moment days passed without punishment. No reaction, the young one whispered one night. That's worse. He was right, revenge is loud, retaliation is messy, but calculation is quiet. The old man said it best. He's deciding what hurts most. That's when the thinker made his next move. Not rash, not emotional, strategic. Because once you've crossed one line, you either freeze or you keep moving forward before the ground collapses under you. He knew they couldn't stay. He also knew running too early would look like guilt, so they waited, worked, watched, until the girl came to the quarters herself, alone. That alone part mattered. She didn't bring the overseer, didn't bring authority. She came with a basket and eyes that had finally learned how to see. The blacksmith saw her first and stiffened like he'd been struck. She didn't flinch. I won't tell, she said quietly before anyone asked. That sentence landed like a dropped glass. No explanation. No apology dressed up as forgiveness, just a statement. Why? The blacksmith asked, suspicion thick. She swallowed. Because I read the books, she said. All of them. That's when the thinker stepped forward. He didn't threaten, didn't posture. What happens next, he said, depends on what you want to be now. She looked at him, really looked. I can't undo what was done, she said, to you or to me. Honest, but I can stop pretending I don't know. She brought them something folded. Old paper, roots, marks, the kind of information men paid dearly for. North, she said, soon, before he decides. The old man laughed softly, not kind, not cruel. You understand what happens if we're caught. She nodded, and if your name comes out. She didn't hesitate, then it does. That was the moment the thinker believed her, not because she was brave, because she'd chosen a side knowing it would cost her. That night 7 men didn't go back to their pallets. They slipped into the fields like shadows that had learned how to move on their own. She watched from a window she used to think was protection. Now it felt like a cage. By morning the master knew, not because someone told him, because power always knows when it's been challenged. He sent hunters, real ones. Men who chased people the way others chased money. Dogs found tracks. Guns followed. 4 were caught, beaten, dragged back. The barn welcomed them again. This time the symmetry wasn't accidental. The master stood there calm, hands folded, satisfaction creeping back into his posture. He sent for his daughter. Look, he told her, look at what your conscience buys. Chains clinked, blood dried, eyes met hers without accusation. That hurt more than anything. I want you to testify, he said. Say what they did. She shook her head. I won't lie. He smiled thin. Truth, he said, is whatever keeps power in place. That was the moment she understood he would never stop. And that understanding was more dangerous to him than rebellion ever could be. Because the most threatening thing to a man like that is someone who sees him clearly and is no longer afraid. The trial was coming, and with it a choice that would burn whatever bridges she had left, because in that courtroom someone was going to lose everything. The only question was who. Courtrooms don't feel dangerous until you realize they're built to make certain people lose. Wooden benches, high ceilings, a judge looking down like God borrowed a robe. Every rule written by men who never imagined standing on the wrong side of them. The master sat confident, relaxed. He'd been here before, just never as the story itself. His daughter sat straight-backed, hands folded, face calm in a way that unsettled him. She wasn't shaking. That bothered him more than defiance ever could. The 4 men were brought in last, chains first, faces second. The room shifted when they entered. White eyes watched them like curiosities, like problems waiting to be solved. The thinker caught her gaze, held it, not asking for mercy, not begging, just reminding her this is where your choice matters. The prosecutor smiled like a man hosting dinner, soft voice, friendly tone, the kind of politeness that hides teeth. He asked her to tell the story. She stood. And for a moment the room held its breath. 7 men came to my room, she said. Her voice didn't crack. They took me from my bed. The master relaxed slightly. Good, he thought, she'll say it. They hurt me, she continued. The prosecutor leaned in. Can you explain how? She paused, the pause stretched. Then she turned, not to the jury, not to the judge, but to her father. They did to me, she said, what you've done to their families for years. The room shattered, voices rose, the judge slammed wood. The master stood halfway, color draining from his face. She didn't stop. You kept records, she said. You wrote it all down, names, dates, children sold, women broken, a boy killed. The prosecutor tried to interrupt. She kept going. They wanted me to understand powerlessness. I do now. The judge demanded order. The question came sharp. Miss, are you refusing to identify your attackers? She answered without hesitation. I refuse to lie so you can pretend my father is innocent. That was it. In that moment she lost everything, her name, her protection, her place. The verdict didn't matter after that. It came fast anyway, guilt, death. But history has a way of interrupting plans. The rope waited and waited. Then the country cracked open. War swallowed paperwork. Armies moved faster than courts. Jails filled and emptied and forgot who they were holding. 4 years passed behind bars. Then one morning soldiers opened the door and said a word that felt unreal. Free. No celebration, no justice, just daylight. The master didn't live to see it. Some said his heart failed. Some said his conscience caught up to him. The truth stayed buried with him. The daughter left the house for good. She carried no inheritance, only knowledge. The 4 men walked into a world that didn't know what to do with them. Freedom without healing, survival without closure. They scattered. Some found purpose. Some found the bottle. Some found silence. The 3 who escaped earlier lived long enough to grow old, but not long enough to forget. And the girl. She spent her life writing what others refused to read. Names, crimes, truth. Because when violence teaches a lesson, memory decides whether it dies or spreads. And somewhere, long after everyone involved was gone, a question remained alive and dangerous. When a system turns people into weapons, who's guilty? The one who built it, the one who enforced it, or the ones who finally used it back? That question never got answered. It just kept waiting like a clock in a quiet house. Tick, tick, tick. Time didn't soften what happened. It just rearranged the damage. Freedom came loud on paper, quiet in the body. The 4 men walked out of that cell thin, older than the years they'd spent inside it. The world called them free, but freedom doesn't erase memory. It just gives it more room to roam. The thinker left first. North. Cities where names mattered less than work. He spoke in churches sometimes, not preaching forgiveness, not asking for it either. Just telling people to stay awake. Some nights he woke up hearing a door that wasn't there. The old man kept moving, county to county, always listening, always asking after a woman and a child who'd been sold south years before. He never stopped looking. Hope had punished him once, but he let it punish him again. The young one built things with his hands and drank with the same hands at night. He couldn't outrun the kitchen floor, couldn't outrun the promise he made when he was a boy. One winter he didn't wake up. The scarred one stayed quiet, married, worked, raised children. People said he was solid, reliable. Nobody knew the price he paid to stay that way. And the 3 who'd escaped early, they survived long enough to tell themselves that mattered. But survival isn't victory. It's just endurance. As for the girl, she disappeared from polite society the moment she chose truth over comfort. No parties, no invitations, no future planned for her by men who thought they owned it. She found work where broken people gather, writing, organizing, helping families search for names that had been erased. She never spoke publicly about the barn. She didn't need to, it spoke through her eyes. At night she wrote anyway, details, dates, ledgers from memory, crimes the world preferred to forget. Because forgetting is how systems rebuild themselves. The plantation rotted slowly. New owners, new rules, same land, same soil holding the same secrets. People told the story in whispers when they told it at all. Changed names, softened edges. Tried to make it mean something cleaner than it was, but the truth stayed sharp. Violence doesn't end when the act is over. It echoes, it teaches. It waits for the next generation to decide what to do with what they inherited. And that's the part nobody escapes. Not the men, not the woman, not the world that allowed it. Because somewhere right now, someone is learning the same lesson the house taught long ago, about power, about silence, about what happens when doors lock. And people stop believing they're supposed to stay on their side of them. And the clock, it's still ticking, waiting for the next move. Here's the part nobody likes to sit with. Nothing was fixed. The land didn't apologize. The soil didn't give anything back. It just kept growing crops like it always had, fed by blood nobody put in the records anymore. People moved on because people always do. New owners talked about progress. New laws used better words. Different uniforms, same posture. Same need to control, just dressed cleaner. The story faded into rumor. Something bad happened there once. That's how history gets buried, not denied, simplified, but the men who lived it. They carried it like a second spine. Every decision after that night bent around it. Every kindness questioned. Every anger measured. Because once you cross a line that deep, you don't go back to who you were. You just learn how to live as who you became. The thinker understood that better than anyone. Used to say quiet when no one was listening, that power never disappears. It just waits for permission to return. That's why he never trusted calm, because calm is what came before the door opened. The woman understood it too. She learned that truth doesn't always free you. Sometimes it isolates you. Sometimes it leaves you standing alone in a room full of people who'd rather not know. But she kept writing anyway, because someone had to remember the real lesson. Not that violence answers violence. Not that revenge heals anything. But that systems built on ownership don't break clean. They crack, they bleed. And when they finally collapse, they crush everyone standing too close. The 7 men weren't heroes. The girl wasn't innocent. The master wasn't unique. That's the most dangerous truth of all, because it means this wasn't a one-time horror. It was a pattern, and patterns don't stop on their own. They stop when someone sees the whole board and decides the game itself is the enemy. So when you hear a clock ticking in a quiet room, when you feel a shift you can't explain, when power starts acting nervous instead of loud, pay attention, because that's usually the moment right before history repeats itself, and the next door might already be locked. There's a reason stories like this never really end. They just change uniforms. Long after the plantation lost its name, long after the house sagged into dust, the logic that ran it stayed alive. It moved into contracts, into courtrooms, into neighborhoods where power learned how to smile. That's how it survives. The thinker used to watch men argue about justice the way gamblers argue about odds. Everyone confident, nobody accountable. He'd sit quiet, hands folded, already knowing how it played out. Because once you've seen a system up close, felt it grind, you stop believing in miracles. You believe in patterns. He died with that knowledge intact. No speeches, no redemption arc. Just a man who understood too much to ever rest easy. The woman lived longer. Long enough to see her work misquoted, sanitized, turned into something safer than the truth. People praised her courage, then ignored her warnings. They always do, because warnings ask something of you. Comfort doesn't. Some nights she'd wake up convinced she heard footsteps on polished wood, not real ones, memory ones. The kind that remind you the past doesn't stay put just because you've moved on. And every time a new scandal broke somewhere else, new names, new victims, same excuses, she felt it tighten in her chest. Different house, same clock tick. That's what people miss. They think the danger is the event, the violence, the night everything went wrong. But the real danger is what comes after, when everyone agrees to forget, when silence feels easier than reckoning, when power realizes it can wait people out. Because power is patient. It survived that plantation. It survived the war. It survived the truth being spoken out loud in a room full of people who didn't want to hear it. It's surviving right now. So if this story unsettles you, good. It's supposed to. Because the question it leaves you with isn't about those men, or that woman, or that house. It's about you. About what you do when you notice the door is locked. About whether you pretend it's none of your business. Or whether you understand that every system teaches its lessons eventually. And if you don't choose when to listen, the lesson will choose you, and when it does, it won't knock. There's always a moment after the story ends where people exhale, like the danger stayed back there, like time handled it. That's a lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep. Because the truth is, nothing in this story stayed where it started. The men didn't carry chains anymore, but they carried decisions. The kind that wake you up at odd hours. The kind that sit beside you when the room is quiet and ask questions you don't have clean answers for. The woman didn't carry a family name anymore, but she carried a record. Proof that a system can look lawful and still be criminal to its core. Proof that politeness and violence can share the same address. And the master, men like him don't really die, not the way people think. They get replaced. Their logic survives. Their methods get refined. Their confidence gets inherited by someone who never saw the blood but learned the rules. That's why the clock never stops. It doesn't belong to a house. It belongs to the system. Tick. You can tear down walls, rename streets, rewrite laws. But if ownership still feels natural, if silence still feels safer than truth, if power still protects itself first, then the door is still locked, just with better hinges. And somewhere right now there's a hallway filling with shadows. Not 7, maybe more, maybe fewer, different faces. Same pressure behind their eyes. They're not talking loud. They're not asking permission. They're waiting. Because once people learn how power really works, once they feel it in their bodies, once they understand the board instead of just the pieces, they don't forget. They don't unlearn it. They just decide when to move. And when that happens again, the clock won't warn you. It never does. This is where most stories stop. Right where you're supposed to feel safe again. The bad man is gone. The chains are broken. Time has passed. Names have been buried under new ones. History puts a period where there should be a question mark. But let me tell you something straight, the way men who have survived the game talk to each other when nobody's listening. Systems don't die. They adapt. The plantation didn't vanish. It learned how to wear paperwork. The overseer didn't disappear. He learned how to sit behind a desk. The ledger didn't burn. It learned how to call itself policy. And the lesson that house taught, that lesson got passed down clean. Because power always studies its own near misses. It remembered the night the door didn't protect who it was supposed to. It remembered what happened when the people it trained to be invisible decided to look back. So it adjusted. Less noise. Better excuses. Stronger narratives. That's how control survives, by pretending it's order. Somewhere long after the barn collapsed and the clock stopped ticking, a man sat in a quiet room and read a story like this one. He shook his head, said it was tragic, said it was unfortunate, said it could never happen again. And then he locked a door. That's the danger, not the past, not the violence, not even the rage. The danger is believing you're beyond it, because the moment you think the lesson is over, that's when the next chapter gets written, and it never announces itself. It just waits, patient, quiet, like a clock you stopped listening to. Right before it reaches zero, let me leave you with this. Every system has a sound, some creak, some shout, some stay quiet on purpose. The plantation sounded like obedience, like routine, like things working the way they were supposed to. That's why it lasted so long. That's why nobody questioned it until the questioning came with blood. People think danger announces itself. It doesn't. It settles in, gets comfortable, teaches everyone the rules, rewards those who follow them, punishes those who don't. And every once in a while, someone notices the pattern early. Someone who sees the whole board. Someone who understands that power isn't loud, it's confident. Those people are rare, and they're usually alone. The thinker knew that. That's why he never pretended what they did was clean. He didn't ask to be forgiven by history. He didn't ask to be understood. He just wanted the truth remembered. The woman knew it too. That's why she wrote even when no one wanted to read. Why she kept names alive that the world preferred to forget. Why she accepted being cast out instead of staying comfortable. They both learned the same lesson from opposite sides of the door. Seeing the truth costs you something, sometimes everything. So if this story makes you uneasy, don't rush to judge the people in it. Judgment is easy. Distance is comfortable. Certainty is cheap. Instead, ask yourself the only question that matters. If you were standing in that hallway, if you heard that clock ticking, if you knew the rules were designed to break people, Would you protect the door? Or would you finally admit it was never meant to keep anyone safe? Because once you see the game for what it is, you don't get to unsee it. And power. Power can forgive a lot of things, but it never forgives awareness. Awareness is contagious. That's why power tries to isolate it. The moment you see the structure, you stop mistaking cruelty for tradition. You stop calling survival order. You stop believing the people at the top are there because they deserve it. And that's when you become dangerous. Not loud dangerous, not reckless dangerous, quiet dangerous. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that remembers. The kind that waits. The thinker understood something most men never do. You don't beat a system by swinging at it. You outlive it. You expose it. You make it nervous enough to overcorrect. That's what he did, even after the night everyone talks about. Because that night wasn't the move. It was the signal. The real damage came later, in conversations that didn't raise voices, in stories passed carefully, in truths that refused to stay buried no matter how many times they were covered. The woman's writing didn't burn down empires. It did something worse. It made them explain themselves. An explanation is where lies start cracking. You want to know why power hates witnesses more than rebels, because rebels can be crushed. Witnesses multiply. Years after everyone involved was gone, someone would open an old box, read a name they weren't supposed to recognize, feel that uncomfortable tightening in their chest, and start asking questions. That's how it spreads. Not like fire, like rot, slow, patient, unignorable. The house learned too late that it had taught too many people how power worked. That once you teach someone the rules, you can't stop them from learning how to break them. So here's the last thing I'll tell you. The most dangerous moment in any system isn't rebellion, it's recognition. That pause right before someone decides they've learned enough. That quiet second when the clock keeps ticking and nobody rushes to stop it, because that's when the next move gets planned. And somewhere right now, someone is standing in a hallway that feels familiar, listening, counting, deciding. And the door, it's already locked. The only question left is, who's on the other side when it finally opens? There's a reason the last move is never loud. Loud draws witnesses. Loud invites correction. Loud lets people pretend they were surprised. Real power shifts happen quiet. By the time anyone notices, the balance is already off. The rules still look the same, but they don't work the way they used to. Orders get questioned. Records get checked twice. Doors that used to close easy start sticking. That's when fear shows up in places it was never meant to live, in smiles that don't reach the eyes, in sudden concern for order, in men who start talking about tradition like it's under attack. That's how you know something's changed. The thinker used to say you can tell who's losing power by how often they mention it. The woman learned the same lesson watching people avoid her name, avoid her eyes, avoid the truth she carried like a shadow. Neither of them expected applause. They understood something deeper. That once a system is seen clearly, it can never fully relax again. It can tighten, it can punish, it can rename itself, but it can't go back to innocence, and that's the real threat. Not what happened in that barn, not what was said in that courtroom, not even what was written down and hidden away. The threat is the memory, because memory teaches patience, and patience beats force every time. So if this story followed you longer than you expected, if it lingered instead of ending clean, good, that means it did its job. Because the most dangerous stories aren't the ones that scare you. They're the ones that make you notice the locks you stopped questioning a long time ago. And once you notice them, you start wondering who put them there, and why. And what would happen if one day they didn't work anymore. Here's how it really ends, not with closure, not with justice wrapped in a bow, not with everyone learning the right lesson. It ends with uncertainty, because uncertainty is the only honest thing left once a system has been exposed. The men never sat together again. Too dangerous, too heavy. Each of them understood that survival meant distance, not from guilt, but from each other, from reminders, from mirrors. They lived normal on the outside. Jobs, families, small routines, the kind of lives that don't attract attention, but inside, the clock never stopped. Every knock after dark carried weight, every raised voice bent the air, Every locked door made the past stretch its legs. The woman lived the same way. She never told the story straight through to anyone, not because she was ashamed, but because some truths don't survive being spoken casually. They demand space, silence, respect. She wrote instead. Let the words sit where they couldn't be interrupted. Let them wait for readers who were ready. And every so often she wondered something she never wrote down, not why it happened, but when it would happen again. Because once you understand the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Different names, different uniforms, same math, someone owning too much, someone else being told to accept it, a door, a clock, a lesson being taught. That's why this story doesn't ask you to pick sides. It asks you to stay awake. Because the most dangerous lie power ever sold was this. That was then. This is different. It's never different, it's just quieter, cleaner, better dressed. So if you ever find yourself in a place that feels stable but punishes questions, if silence feels rewarded and truth feels risky, if rules only bend one way, listen closely. You might hear it tick, 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 and if you do, don't ask who the heroes were, ask who saw it coming and what they chose to do. Before the door finally opened, the last thing power ever expects is to be studied, not challenged, not attacked, studied. That's what the thinker did, that's what the woman did, and that's what the house never recovered from. Because once you understand how something works, you don't have to fight it head on. You just have to wait for it to make the same mistake again, and it always does. Power gets lazy. It starts believing its own myths. It forgets that fear cuts both ways. The plantation thought it was eternal. The master thought his walls were thick enough. The system thought its rules were final. They were wrong, not because they fell all at once, but because they cracked quietly and cracks spread. That's why the story ends where it began. Not in a barn, not in a courtroom, not even in a grave. It ends in a hallway, somewhere else, someone else. A place that feels orderly. A place that smells like safety. A place where someone believes a locked door means control, and outside that door, shadows, not yelling, not panicking, just standing there patient, breathing the same air. They're not asking if they're right anymore. They're not debating consequences. They already learned the lesson. They understand the board. They see the imbalance. They know exactly who's been counting and who's been counted. And somewhere nearby, a clock is doing what clocks always do, not warning, not rushing, just ticking, waiting for the moment when someone finally realizes. The lock was never the strongest thing in the room, and when that realization lands, it's already too late. That's the danger nobody teaches you to recognize. Not chaos, not noise, not fire in the streets. The real danger is calm confidence in a system that's never been questioned. Because when power feels secure, it stops hiding, it repeats itself, it follows habits, it assumes tomorrow will look like yesterday. That's when people who have been watching finally move. Not fast, not sloppy. Deliberate. The thinker understood that the night in the barn was never the end game. It was proof. Proof that fear could change direction. Proof that the rules weren't natural laws, they were agreements enforced by pain. Once that illusion broke, it couldn't be repaired. The woman understood something just as dangerous, that telling the truth doesn't always change the world immediately. But it changes who's awake inside it, and awake people don't stay still forever. So if you're looking for closure, you won't find it here. There's no balance sheet where everything evens out, no scale where the weight finally settles. There's only awareness moving from person to person quietly, like a rumor power can't trace back to a single source. That's how real shifts begin, not with declarations, with recognition. And somewhere, maybe closer than you think, someone just noticed the pattern for the first time, felt that tightening in their chest, that sense that something isn't wrong by accident, it's wrong by design. They won't say anything yet. They'll just watch, learn, count. Because the moment someone understands the system well enough to stop fearing it, that's when the clock stops being background noise and becomes a countdown, tick. The countdown doesn't end with zero. That's another lie people believe. Zero is just when motion becomes visible. Everything before that, The studying, the waiting, the quiet alignment, that's where the real danger lives. That's where outcomes get decided before anyone thinks a decision's been made. The thinker used to say the scariest man in the room isn't the one talking. It's the one who already knows how everyone else will move. Because when someone sees the whole board, they don't rush the play. They let you walk into it. That's what the house never understood. It thought fear only flowed downward. It never imagined fear learning how to look up. By the time it noticed, it was already reacting, already late. That's how systems fall, not when they're attacked, but when they lose the ability to predict. And once prediction breaks, control follows. So if you're still listening, hear what matters now. Not what those men did, not what that woman wrote, not even what that master believed. What matters is this. Every system that survives long enough convinces itself it's permanent. Every permanent thing eventually meets someone patient enough to prove it is. Somewhere right now, a person you've never noticed is learning how the locks work. Not breaking them, not testing them, understanding them. They're watching who holds the keys, who benefits from silence, who panics when questions get specific. They're not angry yet. That comes later. Right now, they're calm. And calm in a world built on pressure is never accidental. So when the noise finally starts, when everyone pretends to be shocked, pretends they didn't see it coming, remember this moment. The quiet one. Because the most important moves are always made before anyone thinks the game has begun. And when the door opens this time, it won't be because someone forced it. It'll be because someone realized it was never locked to begin with. Here's the part people miss when they think the story is over. Power doesn't fear rage anymore. It learned how to absorb that. What it still fears is patience with memory, because memory doesn't argue, it doesn't shout, it just waits for the right moment to surface. The house believed it had buried everything. Names, acts, nights that should have stayed hidden. It believed time would do the cleanup the way it always had. But time doesn't erase. Time sharpens. It turns events into lessons, turns victims into witnesses, turns silence into a map. That's why the real danger never came from the barn or the courtroom or the escape into the dark. It came later, when the people who heard the story didn't forget it. When someone realized the clock wasn't just counting hours. It was measuring tolerance, how much cruelty a system could carry before it cracked, how much silence people could swallow before it burned. And when that tolerance runs out, it doesn't announce itself. It shifts. Suddenly rules feel fragile. Authority sounds defensive. Certainty starts asking for reassurance. That's when you know the balance is off, because power only explains itself when it's scared. So if you ever feel that unease in a place that claims to be orderly, if you notice the locks getting checked twice, if questions start making people nervous, understand this. You're not witnessing the end of something. You're witnessing preparation, the moment before movement, the breath before action. And somewhere, maybe closer than you want to admit, someone just finished learning the lesson this house taught so many years ago. They're not angry yet. They're ready. And when readiness turns into motion, there won't be a warning, only the sound of something old finally realizing. It waited too long. Readiness is quiet. It doesn't pace. It doesn't threat. It doesn't ask for validation. It settles in like a decision that's already been made. That's what the house never understood. It thought danger looked like shouting, like rebellion you could point at, like anger you could punish. It never learned to fear the man who listens more than he speaks, or the woman who remembers when everyone else is rushing to forget. Because readiness doesn't announce itself. It waits until the cost of acting becomes cheaper than the cost of staying still. That's when history tilts, not with a bang, with a shift, a conversation that doesn't go the way it used to, an order that doesn't land clean, a door that closes and doesn't feel as final as it once did. Power feels that before it understands it, a nervousness it can't explain, a sense that eyes are on it from angles it didn't account for, and that's when mistakes happen. Because control, once it realizes it's being watched, starts moving faster than it should, starts tightening where it should loosen, starts revealing things it meant to keep hidden. That's how the end actually begins, not when people rise up, but but when the system starts tripping over itself. So if you're waiting for a sign, for a headline, for a riot, for a moment that feels official, you're already late. The sign already passed. It sounded like a question that didn't get laughed away. It looked like a ledger being reopened. It felt like a pause where obedience used to be automatic. And somewhere in that pause, someone decided they de-learned enough. They're not rushing. They're letting power make the next move. Because when you see the whole board, you don't force the ending. You allow it. And the clock, it's still ticking. But now it's not counting time. It's counting options. And power is running out of them. Options disappearing is when power gets sloppy. That's when it starts repeating itself out loud, when it dusts off old rules and pretends they're solutions. When it tells itself the problem isn't the system, it's the people noticing it. That's when history leans forward, because awareness doesn't need permission. It doesn't need numbers. It just needs time and the wrong kind of confidence on the other side. The House had confidence once. Absolute confidence. Confidence in walls, in ledgers. In silence doing the dirty work forever. And that confidence is what killed it, not fire, not rebellion, not even justice, arrogance. The belief that the clock belonged to them. Here, that's what never made it into any record. After everything, after the trials, the war, the freedom, the distance, none of them ever believed they were done. They lived like men and women who knew the story could circle back at any moment. Like the system might knock again wearing a new name. That kind of living sharpens you. It teaches you to recognize patterns before they announce themselves, to feel the shift before the ground moves. And that's why this story doesn't close the door. Because somewhere right now, someone else is standing where the thinker once stood. Not angry, not desperate, calm. They've noticed who speaks with certainty, who benefits from confusion, who panics when questions get specific. They're not asking if it's fair anymore. They're asking if it's stable, and once that question gets asked, the answer decides everything. So listen closely, not for noise, for hesitation, for the moment power stops commanding and starts explaining, because that's when you know. The next door isn't being locked. It's being measured, and somebody on the other side already knows exactly how much force it'll take. When the time comes, there's a sound right before collapse, not a crash, not a scream, a pause, the kind of pause where everyone's waiting to see who blinks first. The system hates that moment, because in that space obedience isn't guaranteed anymore. People still follow rules, but they're watching while they do it, measuring tone, counting inconsistencies, filing things away. That's when power starts checking locks that never mattered before. That's when it starts asking questions it used to answer. The thinker used to say this was the most dangerous phase, not for the people underneath, but for the people on top. Because once control becomes self-conscious, it stops being smooth. It starts leaving fingerprints, and fingerprints can be traced. Somewhere in the world this very second, a conversation just went quiet when it shouldn't have. An order landed and didn't carry weight. A threat was made and didn't scare the room the way it used to. Someone noticed. They didn't react. They didn't smile. They just remembered it. That's how the real record gets kept. Not in ledgers, not in archives, in people who start connecting dots they were never supposed to see together. Power feels that shift like pressure behind the eyes, like something tightening it can't shake off. That's when it starts moving pieces too fast, promoting the wrong people, punishing the wrong ones, making examples where none are needed. And that's when it gives itself away. Because nothing exposes fear faster than overreaction. So if you're wondering when the next move happens, when the waiting turns into motion, understand this. It won't start with a bang. It'll start with a mistake, a small one, the kind that looks harmless, the kind someone patient has been waiting for, and once that mistake is made, there's no undoing it, because the people who see the whole board don't rush the opening. They wait for the other side to move first. Mistakes don't scream, they whisper. A policy that doesn't line up, a punishment that lands on the wrong person, a rule enforced too hard, too fast, like someone else trying to remind themselves they're still in charge. That's when the watchers lean in. Not the loud ones, not the angry ones, the patient ones. They've been waiting for proof that power is guessing now instead of knowing, that it's reacting instead of deciding, that it's lost the rhythm that kept it untouchable for so long. Because once a system starts guessing, it starts bleeding information. That's when people begin to speak in half sentences, when looks get exchanged instead of words, when silence becomes coordinated without anyone planning it. That's not rebellion, that's alignment, and alignment is deadly. The thinker would have recognized it instantly, that subtle hum beneath the surface, the feeling that something invisible just snapped into place. Not everyone sees it when it happens, but the ones who do, they don't panic, they prepare. They double-check their exits, they clean their timelines. They decide who they trust and who's already chosen the wrong side. Power feels that preparation like a draft in a sealed room, a chill it can't trace. That's when it starts calling meetings, issuing statements, explaining itself to people who never asked. Explaining is weakness dressed up as clarity. And once explanation becomes routine, authority starts leaking out of every sentence. That's when the clock changes meaning. It's no longer counting down to action. It's counting how long the system can pretend it hasn't already lost control of the room. Because somewhere right now, a final decision just got made. Not in public, not in writing, inside someone who's done waiting. They're not angry, they're not afraid. They're calm in a way that doesn't ask permission. And when calm reaches that point, the next sound you hear won't be the clock, it'll be the door. Doors make a sound when they open, not the dramatic kind, not the movie kind. The real sound is softer, wood shifting, air changing pressure, a space that was sealed realizing it isn't anymore. That's the sound power misses, because it's trained to listen for shouting, not breathing. The people who have been waiting don't rush through that door. Rushing is how you reveal yourself. They pause, let the room adjust, let the system expose what it's been hiding behind habit. That's when you see who panics, who reaches for authority instead of answers, who starts talking faster, who suddenly needs rules enforced for everyone's good. Those reactions tell you everything. The thinker would have smiled at that moment, not because it meant victory, but because it meant inevitability. Because once a system reacts emotionally, it's no longer steering, it's correcting, and correction always comes too late. The woman would have recognized it too, that uneasy scramble, that need to control the narrative before someone else does. She'd seen it before, right after silence broke for the first time. Same rhythm, different stage. So if you're listening for an ending, understand this. Endings don't arrive announced. They arrive disguised as adjustments, a rule change, a reassignment, a warning meant for one person that everyone hears. That's how you know the door opened far enough. And once it does, someone on the other side will step forward, not to shout, not to threaten, to ask a question, a simple one, the kind that freezes a room because nobody prepared an answer for it. And when that question hangs there unanswered, you'll feel it, that old familiar pressure. The clock will still be ticking, but now it won't be measuring time, it'll be measuring how long before someone admits they never had control of the door at all. Questions change rooms, not because they're loud, because they refuse to leave. Power hates questions it didn't write, questions without a handle, without a rulebook answer. The kind that just sits there, patient, daring someone to blink. That's when you see who's bluffing. Someone clears their throat, someone cites policy, someone reaches for precedent like it's a shield, and the question stays put. The thinker understood that a good question is leverage. You don't use it to win the moment. You use it to bend the future. Let it echo. Let it travel. Let it land where it wasn't invited. The woman learned the same thing, watching truth move slower than lies but arrive heavier. She learned that once a question is asked by the right person, in the right room, at the wrong time, it can't be unasked, so the room adjusts, chairs shift, smiles tight. Someone suggests a break, someone else suggests a committee, delay dressed up as order, and somewhere in that shuffle a line moves just an inch, enough. Because the people who have been waiting don't need the door thrown open, they only need proof it isn't sealed. Once they have that, they don't rush. They document, they align. They let the system show its seams. That's when the pressure flips. The clock keeps ticking, but nobody's watching it anymore. They're watching each other, measuring reactions, noting who protects what, learning the new map. And somewhere nearby another question is already forming, sharper, closer, unavoidable. When it lands, it won't ask for permission. And when someone finally answers the first one wrong, that's when the room will understand. The door didn't open tonight, it unlocked, and whatever comes next won't be announced. It never is. The last phase is always denial, not the loud kind. The quiet, organized kind. That's when power convinces itself the moment passed, that the door opening didn't matter, that the questions can be managed. That alignment will dissolve if you wait long enough. It won't. Because alignment doesn't need meetings, it doesn't need leaders, it just needs enough people to recognize the same pattern at the same time. That's when the room changes shape. Conversations stop being accidental, silence becomes intentional. People stop volunteering information and start watching reactions instead. Power feels it then, not as panic, as irritation. Irritation turns into pressure. Pressure turns into mistakes. And the people who have been waiting, they don't celebrate. They tighten their focus, because this is the moment when overconfidence reaches for force instead of certainty, when authority stops asking if and starts asking how fast. That's when history repeats itself, not as tragedy or farce, but as exposure. The thinker used to say the end never looks like the end. It looks like a system trying one last time to act normal while everything underneath it has already shifted. The woman understood that too. That truth doesn't need a crowd, it just needs somewhere to stand. So if you're listening closely, you can hear it now. Not the clock, the strain, the sound of a structure holding weight it was never designed to carry. One more question lands, one more answer fails. And somewhere behind a door that used to feel permanent, something waits, not angry, not rushed. Ready. This is where I stop talking, not because the story is finished, because it's crossed into the part that doesn't need narration. Every system gets here eventually. The point where it realizes the people underneath it understand the rules better than the people enforcing them. That's the moment control becomes performative. Orders still get given. Rules still exist, but belief is gone. And without belief, power is just noise. The house never saw that coming. Neither did the ones that replaced it. They all make the same mistake, thinking locks are stronger than awareness. They're not. Awareness doesn't break doors. It waits until doors stop mattering. So when you walk away from this story, don't carry the events with you. Carry the pattern. Because somewhere else right now, someone just noticed it for the first time. Felt that quiet certainty settle in. Understood the board. They won't announce it. They won't rush. They'll wait for the moment when power reaches too far, explains too much, tightens when it should loosen. And when that moment comes, the door won't be forced open. It'll be irrelevant. That's how it ends, not with a bang, with the sudden realization that the lock stopped working a long time ago.